Küstrin Station, March 7th, 1943. Dawn hasn't broken yet. A criminal polizei detective in civilian clothes rolls the edge of a grimy identity card between his fingers. He looks at it, then at the two men standing before him, then at the station clock. The 6:30 to Berlin is already boarding, the whistle cutting through the blackout gloom. His partner is somewhere down the platform. He's got maybe 8 seconds to make a call. He hands the card back, no stamp, no word, and jogs for the train, coat flapping, disappearing into the crowd. Thomas Calnan and Robert Key exhale for the first time in 2 minutes. They catch the train. For now, they're free. But to understand how they got here, and why a detail as small as leather bootlaces would matter more than they knew, we need to go back 2 years, with fire. At 31,000 feet carrying cameras instead of guns, what could possibly go wrong? December 30th, 1941, Brest, Brittany. A silver-blue PR Spitfire from No. 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit knifes along at altitude, unarmed and alone. The pilot is Thomas Calnan, and the day's job is simple to state and dangerous to do. Photograph the German battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in Brest Harbor, so Bomber Command can keep striking them. In December 1941, those ships were the reason the RAF flew again and again into the most defended harbor on the French Atlantic coast. PRU Spitfires carried cameras and extra fuel instead of guns. They lived by height, speed, and the pilot's nerve. Flak found him at about 31,000 feet. One burst was enough. Fuel flashed. Calnan's face and eyes were burned in the blast. The world turned white hot, and the Spitfire became a coffin. He bailed out half-blind and dropped toward a city armored in concrete. Submarine pens, dry docks, smoke generators, flak towers. On the ground, German naval and Luftwaffe security controlled the port zone. The nearest place for a badly burned captured airman to be stabilized was the Hôpital de la Marine in Brest, seized by the Germans in June 1940. It had over 1,300 beds and was fully requisitioned for German use. That's almost certainly where Calnan's burned eyes were dressed before he was fit to travel. From Brest, the road always bent the same way for Allied aircrew. Rail east to Frankfurt am Main, to Dulag Luft, the Luftwaffe interrogation and transit complex officially called Auswärterstelle West. By 1941, it had 3 parts: the interrogation center at Oberursel, the Hohemark Hospital 1 mile away for treatment and observation, and a transit camp at Wetzlar, where batches were staged to permanent POW camps. Many POWs with facial burns passed through Hohemark between questioning rounds. Procedure at Oberursel was theater with purpose. New arrivals were put in solitary, cooler cells. Guards stripped them of papers and badges. Then interrogators tried both pressure and persuasion. Early accounts described threats, enemy of children, spy accusations that could mean the Gestapo, alongside shows of comfort, cigarettes, coffee, better food to induce conversation. The rule British aircrew memorized, name, rank, number, was challenged and logic trapped from every angle. Who questioned Calnan? The most famous interrogator, Hans Joachim Scharf, didn't start questioning Allied flyers until 1943. Calnan's capture predates that, so his interrogators would have been Luftwaffe intelligence officers using earlier variants of the same playbook, threats balanced with feigned friendliness and known facts to draw out corrections. What did they want from a PRU pilot? Target routines, altitudes, camera specifications, fuel loads, departure times, and especially how PRU navigation and evasion worked. The doctrine wasn't secret by late 1941. Strip weight, climb high, trust speed. But timings, routes, and equipment details were valuable intelligence that could cost aircraft later. After Oberursel, after the cooler and the questions and the medical checks, Calnan was batch-shipped to a main camp. That path eventually led to Stalag Luft 3 and then to Oflag 21B at Szubin, where the book's journey really begins. From that hospital bed to a main camp, The only way he'd find freedom was underground. 6 tunnels, 33 men, 1 latrine. The Germans trusted the wrong piece of ground. Szubin, Poland, Oflag 21B. One of those places the Germans called secure. There were 6 tunnels, depending on who you counted. Rock that chewed up spoons, chalk that flowed like wet sugar. A bedboard economy where every plank held a future. The one that mattered tonight started under a latrine. The men called it Asselin, after the French-Canadian officer who'd done much of the work. It was a smug joke and a private prayer. May the filth above hide the hope below. The first men went down around 8 on the night of March 5th, 1943. Lamps made from margarine tins and string lit the way, each flame a tiny, stubborn argument against the dark. 33 bodies queued head to toe, lungs practicing patience. The air moved because someone in a crawl space squeezed a bellows like his life depended on it, because it did. Above ground, towers mapped the night in arcs of light and habit. Sentinels paced, dogs lifted their noses and changed their minds. A potato field lay beyond the wire, furrows under a thin skin of frost. The exit hatch rose under a blanket of dirt, a square of earth that breathed. One by one they came out, faces smeared, coats brushed with damp. Their shapes found the ditches, became shadows, then men, then travelers. Thomas Calnan slid into the night somewhere in the middle of the snake. Behind him, his partner for the next act, Flight Lieutenant Robert Key. Key wore a cut-down greatcoat and a tie that said Oxford to anyone who'd been. Calnan wore dark glasses that hid more than disguise, scars around the eyes that never quite forgave the fire, a naval cap with its heart removed, buttons that whispered civilian to a cursory glance. They stepped into the cadence the tunnel had rehearsed in everyone's dreams. Keep your head down, keep your story straight, keep moving. They needed to be nowhere near here by dawn. From the German command view, the March 1943 tunnel wasn't just an embarrassment, it broke the model. Within weeks, Berlin signed off on an administrative fix. Shut Oflag 21B and ship the RAF officers to Stalag Luft 3 at Sagen. The Szubin camp was formally closed a month after the escape, and by May 1943, the site was renumbered Oflag 64, now designated exclusively for US Army officers. The first American transport arrived in early June, about 185 men, after a 3-day guarded rail move with little food or water. The German answer to tunnels wasn't just more wire, it was reclassification and tighter command culture. 33 men surfaced that night. 2 of them would be undone by the smallest detail. They surfaced from the latrine tunnel into a potato field on the night of March 5th, crawled to the tree line, and started moving toward the railway. The plan was crisp. Hit Bromberg before dawn, buy tickets, and be on an early connection for Berlin before the camp siren and manhunt made stations dangerous. Then a delay that felt trivial but mattered. Key slipped on a slope and sank to his waist in mud. By the time they reached the tracks, they were late. The mud had dried into his trousers and coat, and it was another tell to manage in the daylight crowd. At Bromberg station, around 9:45, the concourse was already heaving. Key committed a small, dangerous cultural error. When an SS man rattled a charity box, he stuffed 2 one-mark notes in the slot. Germans, the camp interpreter had warned, typically offered 10 pfennigs at most. The SS man's surprised look passed, but it was a reminder that crowds and rituals were tests. At the ticket window, Key overpaid and got a bored slap back of change. They opted for a slow local to Schneidermühl around midday. Locals meant fewer checks, and headed for the lavatory to wait out the hours in silence, each locked in a cubicle, communicating by passing notes under the partition. Then the cleaner came, singing and mopping, rattling their doors. Key held his nerve. The cleaner kicked his door and barked something he didn't catch. He flushed, stepped out with a show of dignity, and melted back toward the platform. The local to Schneidermühl was wood-seated and crowded with soldiers. No one asked for papers, just a ticket punch, and they climbed down, 50 miles farther from Szubin. For the first time, they considered a different endgame. Calnan had alluded vaguely to a contact near the Belgian frontier. To use it, they'd need to push west. The board offered another immediate gamble. Stettin, with a change at Küstrin. From Stettin, a Swedish ship might be a final card. The clerk peered at Key. "Are you a Pole?" "No, a Frenchman," Key said, producing his false card. The clerk waved it away and passed tickets, then mentioned Poles needed special permits for Stettin, an ominous hint. Half an hour before Küstrin, the calls for identity checks began. A civilian checked cards and flagged a policeman, who asked about their workers' cards in a tone that made Key think the man wouldn't actually demand to see them. Still, on the platform at Küstrin, the risk felt too sharp. They abandoned Stettin and reset on Berlin's 6:30 train. It meant a night outdoors in deep blackout. They got lost, circled the same bridge twice, and finally huddled in a broken dovecote for a sleepless freeze. No warmth, no rest, just the weight of cold air and the distant sound of trains that could mean capture or escape. This was the moment that began our story. Back at Küstrin station, at 4:45 in the morning, 2 policemen and a rail official manned the barrier. Key remembered the Stettin tickets in his pocket at the worst possible moment. He pushed through, got laughter for his mangled French and mud-streaked coat, and made it to the ticket window. The girl turned his Ken Carter over and over. The forged printing had smudged in his wallet. "I've never seen an identity card like this before," she said. "Well, it's the one I was issued with." A beat. "I suppose it's all right." He got the tickets back. In the lavatory, Calnan shaved while Key sat on the seat and relayed what had just happened. "Oh my God," Calnan chuckled. "Oh my God." And they traded places. When they opened the cubicle, a man stood outside, staring. 2 men whispering in English, emerging from one cubicle in wartime Germany, suspicious on its face. The man combed his hair and left. 30 yards down the platform, he pointed them out to 2 Kriminalpolizei detectives in civilian clothes. Papers. The detectives inspected the identities, then demanded a supporting letter. Key handed over the letter, naming them specialist armament workers for Krupp. The phrasing was flawless German, but the story was flimsy. The detectives were split. One eyed a train now arriving, the other kept reading. The detective with the card looked at it, looked at them, looked at the station clock. The 6:30 to Berlin was boarding, the whistle cutting through the blackout gloom. His partner was already moving toward the train. He had maybe 8 seconds to make a call. He handed the card back, no stamp, no word, and jogged for the train, coat flapping, disappearing into the crowd. Calnan and Key exhaled for the first time in 2 minutes. They caught the moving train. They rolled into Berlin-Charlottenburg, threaded through an open square, then back to the refreshment room for coffee and soup. Calnan's silk escape map showed the best line west. Stendal, then Hanover, then Cologne, then Aachen. Stendal came without checks. On the next leg, Key wanted to stick to slow trains. Checks seemed rarer, but Calnan argued hard for an express, believing their papers were good enough. In the debate, you can hear their mindsets diverge. Key was methodical and watchful. Calnan pushed forward with a streak of confidence. They compromised. Slow to Hanover, express after, only to find the slow train had an identity check anyway. Key thought fast, and the Krupp letter helped. A nearby arrest conveniently drew scrutiny away.
At Hanover, they committed to the 1 a.m. express to Cologne.
It was packed, standing room only, and the checks came in waves. First, an elderly civilian in a soft grey hat nosed through randomly. Armaments worker satisfied him. Later, a policeman examined Key's card under a torch, moving the bean from face to document and back, rubbing the raised lettering with his thumb. Key remembered the man's hesitation. He didn't want to admit that he'd never seen one like it before, so he handed it back without a word. Just before dawn, the last stop before Cologne, they finally sank into actual seats. For the first time, Key allowed himself to think about Aachen and that hazy Belgian contact. Then a portly young civilian boarded for another check, kept Key's identity card, and asked for any other papers. The letter went into his pocket. A policeman waited in the corridor. They were told they'd be taken off at Cologne for a few questions. The interview was short and ended with a weapon. The portly young man pressed a revolver into Key's stomach and shouted that the papers were forged. Key raised his hands and admitted the truth. 2 RAF officers escaped from Szubin. The atmosphere shifted at once. Accusation replaced by the tidy satisfaction of a good collar. The official explained he'd known from the start. Berlin had warned them to look for men in khaki with leather bootlaces. Key protested, "But we aren't wearing any khaki clothing." The answer was as bland as it was devastating. "No, but you were wearing leather bootlaces." By 1943, German civilians wore cloth or synthetic laces. Leather had become too scarce for everyday use. It was the smallest detail on their bodies, and it ended the longest run of luck they would get on German rails. Leather bootlaces ended their run, but policy was about to end everyone else's.
When 33 men escape in one night, the system doesn't apologize. It evolves. After Szubin released its prisoners into the countryside, the Germans closed the camp and moved men to places where even the idea of out felt difficult to imagine. Stalag Luft 3 at Sagan was a camp engineered like a rebuttal. Deep foundations, seismograph microphones that could hear a man thinking underground. Consequences calibrated to break rhythm more than bodies. Colditz, Oflag 4C, wore its reputation like a dare. Escape-proof. They meant it as a promise to Berlin and a challenge to anyone who kept their boots by the door. This is where the story's definition of freedom starts to wobble. If you can't dig, if the doors multiply, if the guards know your face and your habits and the way your shoulders set when you're lying, what does free look like? For Calnan, when tunnels failed, the answer looked like a clinic. 4 attempts, 4 doctors, 4 ways to prove you can't fool physics. In captivity, even compassion has a timetable and a form number. The way home for the sick ran through mixed medical commissions, touring panels of doctors who came into the camps, examined prisoners, and in rare cases stamped a file fit for repatriation. The Germans supplied physicians. The neutral Swiss supplied the guarantee. The commissions moved from site to site. Men were put forward by their senior British medical officer, and only some were even allowed to appear before the panel. The process looked humane on paper. In practice, it was a tight funnel. Colditz makes the point in numbers. In July 1942, the British medical officer nominated 5 officers for the commission. Only 2 were permitted to travel out to where the commission was sitting that October. A year later, Flight Lieutenant Dan Halifax, his face badly burned when he was shot down, was a signature case, illustrating how the commission weighed severe injuries. Not many made it through. Calnan tried to turn that funnel to his advantage, first with the eyes the war had already burned. If one eye could not see, perhaps the commission would accept blindness and send him home. But ophthalmology is a hard place to deceive. Examiners have objective tests that don't care how steady your voice is. The optokinetic drum that sets the eyes jerking in a telltale rhythm, if even minimal vision is present. The mirror test, where a patient who cannot see betrays himself by following his own reflection, fogging the good eye so the bad eye suddenly reads the chart. Menace blink and reflex checks. Calnan cleared sympathy. He'd paid for that the day the cockpit went white, but he couldn't beat physics. Next, he went for the gut. Duodenal ulcers, the kind of pain you can describe but not easily display. Mixed medical commissions weren't a single exam, they were pattern detectors. Weight charts, appetite, night pain stories, the repeatability of symptoms across days, all of it compared against a doctor's long memory of real cases. The stamp did not move. Tuberculosis was the 3rd attempt, fear written into the word. In camp rumor, TB was a pass. In clinic reality, it meant X-rays and lab work that don't care about your story. The panel saw what they needed to see and moved on. Finally, he tried the mind. If the wire couldn't be beaten with a shovel, maybe it could be beaten with a diagnosis. Exhaustion, nerves, the 1,000-yard stare with a German name. The problem wasn't only ethics. They were genuinely broken men who needed those beds, and he knew it. The problem was that the examiners had watched war break minds for years. Feigned symptoms and flattened affect rarely survive trained questioning.
timing tests, and observation when the stakes are this high. The commission looked through the performance and stamped no, again. Across Luft and Offizier camps, the pattern held. A few got out, judged medically unfit for further POW life. Most did not. The mixed medical commissions were a route out, but not an easy one, and not one willing to be deceived. Calnan's 4 attempts ran aground, not on German barbed wire, but on Swiss-chaired medical process and the cold reliability of objective tests. The mirror, the drum, the X-ray, the file. That was a different kind of wall. While he fought doctors, his friends were digging Harry.
76 men escaped. 3 made it home. 50 never saw a courtroom. Stalag Luft 3, night of March 24th to 25th, 1944. 76 men wriggled through Harry and into freezing air. Within days, 73 were back in German hands. What happened next wasn't discipline. It was policy made in anger. At a conference the morning after the breakout, Hitler first raged that consequences should follow. Goering, Himmler, and Keitel argued down the scale but not the spirit. Himmler fixed the number at 50. Keitel ordered that the deceased be cremated and their remains returned to the camp. An administrative way to turn an action into deterrence. The outcomes were then delegated to Gestapo offices across the Reich and occupied Europe. Inside the German apparatus, the actions moved as distributed tasks. After Hitler's outburst, Himmler and Keitel fixed the number and delegated to regional Gestapo chiefs. In Silesia, Oberregierungsrat Max Wieland of the Breslau Gestapo acted as a coordination hub, passing recapture reports and allocating transfers. Field offices then filed template falsifications, shot while attempting to escape, and followed cremation instructions. Post-war courts tied specific teams to specific incidents, establishing that what looked like scattered events was central intent executed locally. The method repeated with minor variations. Pairs or small groups were told they were being driven back to a camp. Somewhere on a country road or near a wood, the car would stop. The official certificates and reports were fabricated to say the prisoners had been shot while attempting to escape. In late March and early April, urns began to arrive at Sagan, as if from a grim courier service. The neutral Swiss reported. In London, Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden promised that those responsible would be brought to exemplary justice. Take the most famous name. Squadron leader Roger Big X Bushell, mastermind of the escape. With him was Sous Lieutenant Bernard Scheidhauer of the Free French Air Force. They were among the first out, made it as far as Saarbrücken, and were recaptured on March 26th. On March 29th, a Gestapo car took them along the Autobahn near Ramstein. At a location near Kinsbacher Road, the order was carried out. In 2017, Ramstein Air Base dedicated a plaque at the spot. Their remains were returned to the camp. Bushell is buried today at Poznan. Another foursome were killed the same day under the Kiel Gestapo. Squadron leader James Jimmy Katanak of the RAAF, aged 22. Flight Lieutenant Arnold Christensen of the RNZAF, aged 21. Lieutenant Haldor Espelid of the Royal Norwegian Air Force, and Second Lieutenant Niels Fuglesang of the Royal Norwegian Air Force. Recaptured at Flensburg, they were handed to Kiel. On March 29th, SS officers drove them to the countryside and carried out the order. The commanding officer would be executed at Hamelin Prison in 1948. Decades later, another officer received a 2-year sentence for his role, the last of the Great Escape trials, in 1968. The 4 men's remains came back to Sagan. Flight Lieutenant Leslie Johnny Bull, the tunneler who improvised the rope signal when Harry surfaced short of the trees, ran south with Reg Kierath of the RAAF, Jerzy Monshine of the Polish Air Force, and Wally Valenta. They were caught near the Riesengebirge and jailed at Reichenberg. At 4 a.m. on March 29th, Gestapo officers removed them for transfer. Their remains were cremated and urns sent back to Stalag Luft 3, marked March 29, 1944. Bull is buried at Poznan. Further east, the Breslau Gestapo handled the cluster on March 31st near Görlitz and Liegnitz. Flight Lieutenant Michael Casey, Squadron Leader Ian Cross, Flight Lieutenant Albert Hake, and others. The pattern, small parties driven out,
The order carried out, cremations noted, became evidence later.
When the RAF police untangled the chain of orders after the war, these names anchored charges and verdicts at the Hamburg trials.
The paperwork trail is as stark as any weapon. One surviving document from the period informs the camp of the arrival of cremated remains of 29 officers, neatly reducing lives to an inventory line. In June 1944, when Swiss camp inspectors reported the incidents, and German notices tried to normalize the story with "shot while attempting to escape," Eden told Parliament the government would pursue the guilty. In 1947, a British military court convicted 18 men for roles in the war crimes. 13 were executed by Albert Pierpoint at Hamelin. Others received prison terms. Some died in Soviet custody. A few vanished in the post-war chaos. Justice was imperfect but real, and it stretched on for years, with the final conviction not until 1968. Two further facts matter for the moral geometry. First, the incidents were not a single event. They were dozens of individual actions spread over days and hundreds of miles, each pre-packaged with a lie and a cremation. Second, 3 men made it. Per Bergsland and Jens Müller reached neutral Sweden by ship from Stettin. Bram van der Stok threaded the underground through Holland, Belgium, France, and Spain to Gibraltar. Their survival doesn't soften what happened to the others. It shows exactly how extensive the machine was that failed to catch all 76. Inside Saigon, the news bled back in fragments. An urn here, a whisper there. The senior British officer asked for proof, then for names. The Germans offered euphemisms. The camp made a memorial, which still stands, a tidy geometry of names and nationalities carved into stone. Photographs show the faces: 20 British, 6 Canadian, 6 Polish, 5 Australian, 3 South African, 2 New Zealanders, 2 Norwegian, 1 each Belgian, Czech, Lithuanian, and Argentinian. Thomas Calnan wasn't among the 76. He didn't crawl through Harry that march. But the dedication that opens free as a running fox makes his position unmistakable. He starts his book by asking you to walk past a memorial wall. 50 names. 50 names, 1 dedication. That's where the title finally clicks.
After the war, he flew jets, but freedom? He'd redefined that in a cell.
After the war, the man who once crawled under latrines and argued with doctors took jets into the sky as a test pilot. The RAF called him Wing Commander. Titles are what institutions give you when they can't give you back time. In 1970, he published Free as a Running Fox. It's a title you can read like a smile and a wince. Fast, clever, untouchable in the way a living thing in its element always is. But open the book and the first thing you meet is not a boast or a map. It's a dedication. To the memory of my 50 friends and companions at Stalag Luft 3 who, without trial or sentence, were shot by Himmler's Gestapo after escaping from the Great Tunnel on the 25th of March 1944. Their names should not be forgotten. There's no swagger in that sentence. There's a promise.
Remember the opening? The detective's glance at the clock, the small mercy of a schedule? That was a chapter in a younger war, where cunning might be enough. The men in the tunnels thought the game would always be wits versus wire. The men with authority decided otherwise. By the last page, the phrase escape-proof has done something strange. It no longer sounds like a boast. It sounds like a fear the system had about something it couldn't touch. You can cage a body. You can burn the eyes and bind the hands and send a man around the circuit of camps until he's more number than name. You can even use force to make a point, but you can't make a mind kneel. Freedom for Calnan is not a sprint to a border. It's the stubborn decision to stay human when the system has an answer for everything except the part of you that says no. It's carrying the names, so the state that tried to erase them has to watch them live on your page. That's the reversal. That's the proof. The man who once measured liberty in gates and timetables now defines it in a place you can't photograph. And he leaves us a question. What do you do with a freedom you can't see? You remember. You keep the ledger open, and you say the names.